Hello, Grand Rapids. Hello, YouTube. This is Jeremiah Bannister and Joe Elder. We are the boys of PaleoRadio, and it's been, what would you say, man? It's been almost 2 weeks since it's been 2 weeks exactly since our last show, dude. And I've missed you, bud.
I've missed you too, but we've seen a lot of each other. We've been doing some other things. There's things in the works.
Dude, there's a lot in the works, and more of that will be revealed in different platforms, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and PaleoRadio.us, all of those good places with great fun. Over the next coming weeks, we're going to be having a whole bunch of fun with this, but there's a whole bunch of great stuff. But a lot has happened, Joe. And in fact, we're kind of approaching this first topic with some reluctancy. In fact, we talked about it and said we didn't even know if we wanted to say anything. You know, I know that John Moseman, he went out and made a public statement about it. And he really wanted us to go out and make a public statement about it, and we were hesitant. And the issue is Ferguson. And
yes.
so let's talk about this a little bit. And we've talked about it a lot. We've talked about it a lot privately with each other. And I guess it's time to incorporate other people into our thought process. So let's begin with that, and we'll move on from there to a different topic after a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, well, Darren Wilson, obviously, just a quick update so people know how we've caught up. I don't know the exact date, but he shot an unarmed black teenager by the name of Michael Brown. There's a scuffle at the police cruiser, which indeed led them out away from the cruiser at an inargued distance. It's actually disputed what the distance is in which they were away from the vehicle. But Darren Wilson discharged his weapon on Michael Brown and killed him, and Michael Brown didn't have a weapon. There was a decision to see if he was going to even be indicted, not to be prosecuted. It was just to see if they were going to indict him to actually hold a trial, and they decided not to do so. Ever since there's been riots in Ferguson, obviously people who would have to be under a rock to not know a lot of what's been going on. But there's a lot of things that have taken from it, Jeremiah, that I think is interesting. We can look at it in a few different ways. We can take this as, is this a racial issue where the straws broke the camel's back, in the sense where maybe it's not the best situation, and maybe it's not the best example of a clear-cut case where there's something going on here with racial disparity, but there is a kernel of truth to that. Are we looking at it as this is exactly what's going on and it's racial disparity, or are we going to look at it in terms of violence and use of force by police? And I think we can blend those two, but in order for real change, we would have to distinguish and seriously make a case as to if we are going after just police brutality of all American citizens and what's going on in America, or are we going to focus as this is a racial issue where we need to focus on more civil rights issues and we need to focus on more equality of minorities?
People look at this like an isolated thing, right? I mean, like it's like they look at all of them as isolated things. And I'm interested in, I really enjoyed hearing what you had to say on it. In fact, you've challenged a number of my own prejudices from a privileged position, right? And so, but you really brought up the systemic nature of this, and I want you to expound on it, man. I really appreciate your thoughts. I think viewers would too, that this isn't just an isolated thing, that this is a cultural problem that we're facing, and that it seems like it's becoming more obvious and obvious. In fact, it seems almost strange, I guess, that people at this point are still looking at all of these different instances as just simply instances. It's still at that place where it's just bad apples. It's not at a place yet for a lot of people in this country where almost a split in this country, right? Almost an even divide over whether people think it's bad apples or whether people think that it's a bad barrel. And I liked what you said about bad barrels. I want you to say it again. It was good.
Yeah, basically it is this a question of bad apples where this is, and who's to say, according to the grand jury, I guess Darren Wilson is not a bad apple. But taking this case, is the question of police brutality and violence, is that a bad apple scenario where it is the individual acting on his own accord, or is it a bad barrel example where we know it's a systemic process? I argue that it's a systemic process. The reason I do is because I can predict what's going to go on in the future. I can predict for you that there's going to be an authoritarian, violent backlash against a minority, some type of minority in the next couple months, whether it be a child who's 12 years old in Cleveland who gets shot for having a toy gun, or whether it's a man who gets choked to death for selling cigarettes on the streets of New York City. These are examples of things that are systemic, and I don't believe that it's that the police are racist inherently. I think it's better news when it's a white police officer on a black individual because of the historical connotations to that in our society. But I think it's more focused on what we need to think about with averages, numbers. The police brutality is it more because of a racist inherent nature, or is it because of a defense of a status quo in our country, which is what I think it is. It's a defense of a status quo that is, we prefer to protect one portion of our society more than another portion of our society. And going back to it with Michael Brown, we've had articles that have been written where there's multiple cases of individuals that have been hurt or have been had their rights violated by police that are minorities that are way more clear-cut examples of police violence than what's going on in Missouri. But I think it's a case of straw that broke the camel's back, just outrage in general.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I think, John McWhorter, he wrote over at Time magazine, and I'm just gonna quote. He says this. He said, "What America owes communities like Ferguson and Black America in general is a sincere grappling with the take on law enforcement that is so endemic in black communities nationwide. As Northwestern philosopher Charles Mills has put it, black citizens are still differentially vulnerable to police violence, thereby illustrating their second-class citizenship. This is true. It's most of what makes so many black people of all classes sense racism as a key element of black life." And I think that that's the bigger point, right? Is that and it says something, and white people in general have to kind of grapple with the fact, if nothing else, that so many black people, regardless of their class, regardless of where they happen to work, regardless of where they go to church or anything else, they have a sense that racism is a key element of what they experience as American citizens all the time, every single day, and that it's a part of this. There at least has to be a response to why that is the way it is, and it doesn't help, right? If you deny the case that's been made here and elsewhere, made more eloquently elsewhere, but the case that this is a systemic problem. If you deny that, then you're left with a handful of options. One of them being black people are just too stupid to know the truth of their situation, or they've been brainwashed by the Democratic Party. I mean, you're left with these kind of things. I mean, Buchanan-esque stuff. Yes. And if you want to read a classic example of someone who just doesn't freaking get it, read Pat Buchanan's thoughts. He gets it on some issues, but boy, when it comes to the race issue, he's so dead wrong. But that's where America is left. They're at a crossroad, and they have to make a decision. Are they going to fall back on ridiculously stereotypical caricature type arguments, or are we going to actually grapple with the reality that our fellow Americans that just happen to be a different color, that they sense something in large numbers in a way that is not sensed by white people, but is about white people, right? Like, and Americans have to deal with this. It's long overdue. And dude, I love that you brought up the fact that there's so many other examples of police brutality. And like you said, people, they can go to Connor, what is his name? Connor Friedersdorf over at the Atlantic. Connor Friedersdorf has a whole bunch of these videos lined up for people to say, listen, if you want a perfect example of something clear-cut case, you've got a camera right there. He has a whole bunch of these videos lined up and says each one of these videos, it's rooted in the same problem as the situation in Ferguson, but it's a clear-cut case. There's not conflicting statements. There's not murky evidence. There's not a debate over how far somebody was, and that these stories, even by themselves, are valuable. Put together, they're invaluable, and tragically, they're being ignored.
That's right.
They're being ignored by a large number of people in the United States. But this is the last thing I'll say. I like that we're seeing more and more and more of policing the police, right? That this is becoming something that it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? It's not winning the day all the time. It's losing the day most of the time. But the mere fact that this is becoming something that even on Facebook you can scroll down and see people sharing policing the police or Cop Block or any of these other Facebook pages or websites that are dedicated to this. I think there's the Free Thought Project. That's another one that I see a lot. The anti-media. That's another one I see a lot. It's now becoming part of the conversation, and the more people see stuff like this, they can hold on to, well, Darren Wilson wasn't guilty. They can hold on to that all day long, but they can't get around these other cases in the exact same way, and that's why I think it's so important that they're at least brought to light.
That's right. I've got two things on it. One is, if we want the best way to have guaranteed that Darren Wilson was innocent, if you want to argue from Darren Wilson's innocence, which I personally, I honestly, I doubt it. I do. But if you want to argue for Darren Wilson's innocence, if he would have had a badge camera on, if he would have had a badge camera, then he would have been absolutely fine. We would have seen everything it is. Everything you would have said would have been confirmed with video evidence, and there would have been no issue whatsoever. So there's an argument for policing the police. The second thing I was going to say is I don't appreciate, or I don't think other people appreciate, the linguistic argument that's made about there is linguistic racism, and when we're talking about the system. And I know everyone rails on, the media and how the media does it. But put it this way. Assigning leaders to be the mouthpiece for a racial group of people is I believe, it's a entirely wrong concept to take in as truth. It's a wrong way to look at people. And it's part of what white privilege is. In fact, it's one of the biggest parts of what white privilege is. Paula S. Rothenberg, that's who you should look up. She's the one who wrote the book on white privilege. There's 26 privileges that white people have, that we inherently have, that we don't realize we have. One of them being that we have the right to individual thought. And when I say what I think, that's just what Joe thinks. I'm never a spokesperson for white people when I speak, ever. I just speak my own mind. We have a way in our media of connotating people and say, these are black leaders in the community. These are people that are the mouthpiece for what black people think. And to me, it's an entirely wrong way of thinking. It doesn't give individual people individual ideas. When there was pumpkin patch riots, right? You had pumpkin patch riots with white people, and we had riots at a beach. Now, we're terrible at rioting because we riot in awful places, but white people do riot. And when we did, there's never a call to the white leaders in the community. How do we get a white response to this? What's the white response for a Kentucky basketball team winning a national championship and then burning cars? All white kids out in the streets, or predominantly white kids. Who is our white leader? And for all white people, not for your area, your local, not politically. The white leader, who we all know to be the guy who just, when he talks, it's what white people think, and we know it's true. It's disingenuous, and I think it's distasteful. And until we get over that in our media, we'll see things like this over and over again. A call to a black leader is just as irrelevant as a call to a white leader, in my opinion.
That's what Buchanan did in his article. He's like, what is it, Juan something on Fox News? He's like, and he also brought up, where's the black leaders in this situation? I'm just thinking, what a weird thing, right? And what does that kind of assume about black people in general? That if somebody stands up and says something, that they all just go, well, we're following the leader, and that's just what they do. Like, is that really what we think? Right? Is that what we ought to think? Is that what we ought to think about entire segments of the human population in the United States? Is that it's this kind of lockstep thing where they're goose stepping along in agreement with their leaders, and it's bizarre to me.
Well, and it's bizarre because as a white person, if I say, who's our white leader, there's a little pang in my stomach that's kind of like, what do you mean the white leader, the guy that leads all of us? What the hell are you talking about, man? And wouldn't it be, is it a crazy assumption to assume that other minorities have that same feeling when you say, well, who's your leader in your race? Like, let me speak to your chief. Dude, it is. It's ridiculous.
It's bring me to your leader
It's
stuff.
bring me to your leader.
Bring me
It's
to your leader.
ridiculous.
Yeah. I don't have one like that, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
It is.
if white people were challenged, and I've heard you do this before, and it's one of the best moments in Southpaw's history, I think, when you had a caller, and nothing against the caller, right? But dude, you just manhandled the whole thing and brought this up, saying, who's the white leader? And you said, no, the leader of all white people, right? And just saying that out loud, I couldn't help but to laugh. But dude, it's funny because it's true. Like, it's funny because even just the idea of reflecting on it as a white person is just like, well, that's crazy talk. And yet it's so easy to casually speak of other people, black people, as in need of a new Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or they need to rally behind Jesse Jackson, or they need to rally. And I think it's weird, too, that the same people that are asking about black leaders, and where are the black leaders, that when there are any kind of self-appointed black leaders or very popular personalities within the black, that happen to be black, that a lot of black people happen to agree with, that they call them race baiters, or they call them race peddlers and everything else. And it's like, dude, so you're demanding something that, insofar as it ever can come true, in the way that you're kind of claiming you want it to come true, that you simply prop it up, knock it down, prop it up, knock it down. And all the while, you're wrongly describing everything, and you're failing to recognize what's most important to the situation, and that is that privilege is real, and that this affects people every single day in different ways, and disproportionately to what color your skin is when you opened your eyes and saw yourself in a mirror for the first time. That is such a huge thing, and they miss it. So it's like adding insult to injury, right? It is. It's insult to injury, and it's a vicious cycle.
And the last thing I will say is it's how we connotate who's doing what. The black people are rioting in Missouri right now. Are they? Is that what it is? It's just like there's a website that says the black people website, and they said, oh, it's a riot now, and that's where you got
right.
Like, the way it's so disingenuous.
Right.
This claim. And so I think that there's problems there that need to be sought after. And I think it's also having your cake and eating it too, to say, this is more of a conservative argument, but to say, well, this group of people, they have it the same way as I do. I don't have it any better than they do. But at the same time to say, they're leaderless.
Right.
Why, if you don't feel you need a leader, why do you feel other minorities need leaders? If you didn't feel that way, that would be an argument for an even playing. That would be an argument that we're all equal. But you don't say that. You say they need leaders. Why? Is it because it's a ladder? Is it because there's a systemic process where there's people that are treated differently? Yeah. Yes. Yes, there is. And it's easy to see for people who know how to see it.
And it's not just that we don't feel that whites, when asked this question, generally don't feel that they need a leader. It's that if asked to point one out, they can't, because they recognize that there's differences of opinion amongst people who are white. I've heard it tossed out there. Vice President Joe Biden. Like, dude, white people would laugh if they hear this. Like, who speaks on behalf of white people? Vice President Joe Biden. Yeah. Like, no, like, that's just a joke. But I've heard that tossed out by someone making an effort to do it. But dude, like, white people, they wouldn't be able to do it. And it's in that same logic. If you ask a white person, now, does that logic apply to black people? And if it doesn't apply to black people, please explain why.
Yes.
Like, it doesn't land you in the realm of the racism you say you don't have. Right?
Yes.
Like, just do it. And it ain't happening. It's like trying to find unicorns. Right.
It is. It's an onion. It's an onion, and there are layers to it. And in the deeper embodied layers, when we get down into the more deep philosophical thinking of it, you and I, Jeremiah, are conditioned to not see our privilege in daily life. We're conditioned to think that everything we've got was from our own individual hard work, and that everybody, when they experience what I experienced, they experience in the same way. So when I go and bothered me in the store, it means that everyone doesn't get bothered in the store. Or when I stand up and speak my piece, everyone thinks, oh, I didn't know Joe thought that. that everyone has individual right, but they don't. The mental game that's being played is to condition you, especially as a white male, to not think that I've had a benefit, and to think that I just naturally am better at doing things than other people are. And that's why I get this. And it's a narcissistic starting point, but really it's because white people control a lot of systems. And if I want to speak to someone in higher authority, it's very likely that I'll get to speak to someone of my race. And isn't that an advantage in itself?
It's fish in a bowl, bro.
It's fish in a bowl.
It's fish in a bowl. Yeah.
But, yeah. Hey, other topic. More, well, lighthearted, but somewhat serious topic as well. We had a famous biblical person put on trial. How about you tell us about that?
We did have a famous biblical person put on trial. I was going through trying to figure out different topics to talk about, and we normally just talk about current events, right? And we kind of give our spin on things that are happening. We try to look at the news under the news, or wax philosophical on what we think is really going on. But in this is kind of in that same realm, but it allows us to have a little bit more fun. This is a current event insofar as that it happened this last month in November. There was a debate between two different people, Dershowitz and Spitzer, Elliot Spitzer, Alan Dershowitz. Both of them lawyers, one an ex-governor and one of them a lawyer, and they debated, they faced off with each other in a mock trial. Oh, and the topic was whether or not Abraham and his near sacrifice of Isaac in the book of Genesis, whether or not it would find him Abraham guilty in a modern court of child endangerment and attempted murder. And it was held. It was an audience altogether of about 1,300 people. It was at New York City's Temple Emmanuel. Federal District Judge Allison J. Nathan presided over the mock court battle. So this would have been, honestly, dude, I would have loved to have been there. like to hear this and to hear Spitzer going off against Dershowitz on this issue. But when we were talking about this, we said, okay, it's one thing to say, the story of Abraham and was he guilty. It's another thing to read it. And this is what's going to make this a little different. I'm going to actually read for everyone. I'm going to read Genesis chapter 22, only the verses that are relevant to this court hearing. Okay, and then we're going to talk about whether or not how this works out, and we'll give details about how the people voted in Temple Emmanuel in New York City. It's going to blow your mind. But Genesis 22, you ready for this, Joe?
Oh, tell me about.
You're ready for some Bible learning? Okay.
I'm loaded.
You're loaded. All right, here we go. Chapter 22, and I'm reading from the NIV. Okay. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him two of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for his burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Father," right? Okay, "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. And there you go.
There it is.
There it is. The rest kind of just is the moving on. He promises him a whole bunch of stuff. Descendants for a long, long, long time. It's going to outnumber the stars in the sky. And then it says, verse 19, then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. So he just, it's over. The story's done.
And the story ends.
Nothing. The story ends. Bada boom, wrapped up nicely with a bow. So, okay. After hearing this story, the people debated, and it was amazing to see the way that people voted. Okay, on the charge of endangering the welfare of a child, 784 audience members voted for not guilty. 529 said he was. So it won by over 200 votes that he was not guilty of endangering the welfare of a child. And as for the attempted murder, the numbers were 687 to 590 respectively.
Yes. So Abraham is found not guilty.
Yeah, Abraham. Yes, Abraham was found not guilty.
Dude, I have to get into this a little bit though. Okay.
Yeah.
This is why it's fun, because Elliot Spitzer lost that court date, but religion lost that argument. Alan Dershowitz had to abandon all tenets of religious cause to that story in order to be able to get that not guilty call for Abraham. He tried to, this is, let me see here, this is on the Blaze. This is Dershowitz. Dershowitz argued that one of the charges in the mock case, child endangerment, should have been dismissed, as there's no evidence in his view that Isaac wasn't past 17 years of age. So it's basically saying it's not a question of what Abraham was doing was awful and a crime. The question is if he was doing it to a child or not. So it's still giving him it's not giving him any bit of distance in morality. Also, this is the bigger one. This is the kicker that crushes the religious connotation to the whole story and all the religious significance. Is Dershowitz had said, let me see here. The famed attorney at Harvard and law professor also argued that God and Abraham were merely playing theological chicken.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And that the so-called crime would have never been committed, the Times reported. He would have never plunged the knife, Dershowitz said of Abraham. So what Dershowitz's argument is saying is, oh, they're playing chicken, but Abraham would have never actually killed his son. The religious connection, the religious significance of the story is that Abraham loved God so much and feared God so much that he would sacrifice his son if told to. The only thing that saved him from killing his own son was God, the man that made him set it up. And so it's in a way, it morally knocked the foundation just right out from under the story in the way, even though they lost the court case, the religious battle, it had to abandon all religious significance in order for that to be true.
And let's be real. When Abraham prayed, let's just suppose Abraham's a real guy. Let's suppose that he really did pray. It's that still small voice thing, dude. Like I was saying before the show, it's that whole still small voice thing where one guy is claiming that something spoke to him in such a way that he believed it was another creature, an invisible one, right? That was telling him to do this murderous, barbaric thing. I mean, let's just ignore the fact that we're talking about sacrificing, and that the fallback was, well, we're gonna slit a ram's throat for the bad things that we've done to satisfy the invisible guy. Mm-hmm. But all of this is predicated on whether or not Abraham heard a single thing from God. And it's kind of like the tale of Jesus going into the desert and being tempted by Satan and fed by angels and around wild animals. You got to kind of just trust Jesus on that. Right? There's no way to confirm whether or not any of what was said actually was true in the wilderness. The same thing's true here. There's no way for anyone to know if, in fact, Abraham heard anything. You have a guy praying in a room who goes, Lord, I'm here, and you're telling me to go and kill my son? Okay, I'm going to wake up early in the morning and walk for 3 days and lie to everybody around me, mislead people, to walk up a mountain, to mislead my own son, to put him on an altar. And the only reason that I stopped when my knife was up in the sky, according to me, is that in my brain, that still small voice came back in my brain and told me not to kill my son. If we threw that into a modern day scenario and said, and you had somebody in court who was like, God told me in my brain. We don't let people use that argument when they're breastfeeding children while driving. Why would we say that it wouldn't still be a case if it was putting somebody on an altar and raising a knife like you're going to kill the person, and then saying the only reason I didn't kill you is because an invisible creature communicated to me in my brain? Like, how? It's mind-boggling. It's mind-bending, right?
It is. Another angle to look at this, and to, like, let's knock it around every which way, shall we?
Yes.
I think another way to look at it is, if it was true, let's say that it is true, and that God did send Abraham up there. Hearing a story like that, is that a reasonable God to worship? The one that was just like, psst, hey dude, go up there and kill your kid for me. Ah, just kidding. Like, that's exactly what happened. Is that a God worth worshiping? So even if we play the utopian idea that is that a God worth worshiping? The one that's going to just on a whim decide you're going to trade your kids? Dude, he bet with the devil on Job. He just had a bet with the devil. Oh, I bet you he won't curse me. I bet you he will. Well, let me just fuck up his life and see if it works or not. That's what he did.
Right, it is what he did.
Even if he's even though I feel it's a pretend God, if it's a real God, is it a God worth even giving a deified status to?
Right. No way. You know, I think, and as an adult, as a parent, you know, I've got 4 children of my own, and if I ever got to a place in my life where I believed that I was told by a voice to kill my son Athanasius or my son Ambrose, I would immediately go to my wife and say, we need to go to the VA. I think I need to be committed. And I'm not joking. I'm saying this as someone who's bipolar. I'm saying this as someone who has done that before, who's had thoughts, who's had very scary thoughts, and who's willingly gone in because I recognize the danger of having those thoughts in the first place, much less entertaining them. The idea that I would hear those things and I could get away with lying to my wife, walking away with the kid, and doing all the things that Abraham did, and then my wife not thinking twice about it or not being upset about it, or the idea that the government couldn't say, dude, you need to be in a clinic. Like, you really do need to be put into a clinic. In fact, if I did all those things and Angela reported that I did all those things, they would put me in a clinic. It would not be a voluntary thing at that point. They'd be like, oh no, you brought your kid up to a mountain, you lied to everybody around you because you said you heard a voice that told you to sacrifice your kid. Yes, you are going to a mental clinic. Like, that's not even up for debate, I don't think, really, in modern U.S. society. Unless we're talking about patriarchs from the Bible, and all of a sudden, all of that just goes out the window, and we treat those people as if it's different all of a sudden, and that not just that it's different, but that it's the polar opposite. One that's in need of attention, medical attention, psychiatric attention, and the flip side being, this is somebody we need to model ourselves after as people of faith. Those are so diametrically opposed, but this is exactly what goes on all the time, and it's the weirdest thing in the world, because I don't know anybody who in reality would be perfectly fine with it. And this too, if the role was reversed and it was Angela who had that, I'd call the cops. If she came home and she told me that happened, I wouldn't call the cops. I would tell my wife, you need to go to a clinic. That is not the Lord, right? Like, this is not Jehovah. This is a bad thing, and I would say the same thing to Abraham. It wasn't Jehovah, and you shouldn't have done that. And your ass needs to have CPS talking to you.
That's right.
Right. Like,
yeah. Well, and I think you're right. You've brought this up before. It's the question of if it is I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. I guess it would be the religious angle of it that you take. You know what I mean? There's ways of looking at this. And it's unbelievable that people would think that this is a proper way to act or a way to idolize. But, you know, people daily still use that argument that God told them to do it. It's just our logical discourse now tells us that they're full of it. You know, it would be way more likely that that would be a believable story. A couple years ago, there was a gal who attempted to drown her kids in a bathtub, and she said it was because God told her to do it. Well, logical discourse immediately tells us that she's crazy.
Right.
She needs help. Now, let's backtrack 2,000 years, take the same woman, put her in the same situation about maybe she's going to drown her kids in the river, but she said God did it. And imagine she's saying it with power and money to an illiterate group of people.
Right.
There might be some belief that she actually thought God was there, but now it's 2,000 years later, and we know that that is crazy talk.
Right.
And so it's almost as simple as that. Is the idea is that we're so there's such a distance, like you were saying. There's just such a distance between being someone who is worth giving your attention to in terms of being someone to idolize or to live like, or being someone who hurts and endangers their own children. And somehow there's this way, this story is a blending of the two and still comes out where people will say, man, well, you know, there's still some ways of logically arguing for killing your kid for God. And it's, how? What? They toss a legitimate argument.
Because they toss it into the dustbin of typology, right? Like they say, well, it was really just a type, it's a foreshadowing of the sacrifice of Jesus. And you're like, so wait a second. The kill your kid thing, right, was a type that led to, well, don't really kill your kid, that's coming. Right? And in the meantime, kill this ram.
Yeah.
And dude, this is the logic. And they're like, oh yes, that's exactly how it goes. And you're like, just shaking your head like, dude, no, this is on every level, it's bad. And every justification just digs deeper and says, oh, it's uglier, trust me. I mean, we're just going to keep going and showing you just how morally repugnant the entire thing is from beginning to end.
Well, and let's play with it a little further. Dershowitz's statement of saying that it was theological chicken. Now, if that story is true, then what that Bible story is saying is God's going to tell you to do some stuff that you don't want to do. Just pretend you want to do it, and you can trick him.
Yeah.
Like man won. Man beat God in a game of chicken, according to Alan Dershowitz. Like Abraham literally was like, I'll go up there, and I'll do it behind my back, cross my fingers. It's ridiculous. It's just junk. And if you take Dershowitz's argument, it literally would. The story of that would be that God will test you and he'll have you do things. He'll tell you to do things that he really doesn't want you to do. You just have to pretend you want to with all your heart, and then he'll give you a break at the end.
And when God dodged the car Abraham was driving in his direction, the response is, you know what? I wasn't planning on doing this, but you better be glad, because if I was, then you would have killed him. Right? You would have ran into me. It's like, so did God lose the game of chicken?
Oh yeah, he lost.
And did he say, well, I lost on purpose because I'd never really do that? I mean, that's a crazy talk. I mean, you're the only weirdo willing to crash your car into me. Right? Yeah. I mean, how does that play out? If it is a game of chicken, how did God fare?
It would be like setting a house on fire and then really expecting them to think you're a savior if you ran in to save them.
It's Maury Povich, dude. It's Maury Povich. Maury Povich creates a reckless scenario, right? Bringing people in, is this your baby's daddy? And then when they find out it's not, it creates this discord and chaos, and the woman goes running off into the side and she's crying and upset, and then he runs over and he's the savior. He creates the platform for this. Mm-hmm. Craziness and chaos come out of it, and then so it's like starting the fire, right? Getting the wood there, pouring it with gas, throwing a match on it, and then running up and going, rear, rear, I'm here, and saying, I just saved you from the situation, and everybody's like, Maury, and that's the show. And I'm like, dude, this is Maury Povich stuff. This is right up his alley.
Even further on that, it would be like him being mad. Everyone would know that you set the fire. You'd be like, oh yeah, I totally set the fire. I set the fire and I saved him, so why don't you think I'm good? Like, it really would be. You wouldn't be hiding the fact that you also put the situation in play where it would put them in a detrimental place. So it's just it's a strange story that in the 21st century we look back to say is a good example of God's grace and God's love. I just think it's something that should be rescinded to the dustbins of history.
Right. Yeah, but it is a great example of faith. Right? It's not a great example of anything else, man. But, dude, you're putting a lot of faith in the idea that what that guy told you he heard in his brain that led him to raise a dagger over his only son, that was actually the Lord speaking to Abraham. So anyway, we could have tons of fun. And, dude, honestly, we could go many directions. I mean, I don't know the answer to certain things. I'd love to hear, like, legal issues. They may have touched on the debate. Like, what if Isaac was 17 or 18 years, let's say he was 18 years old, and he was unwilling at first because he was deceived, but once he knew what was going on, he was kind of passive. Would the state still prosecute? I don't, because even if the son was like, oh no, I'm down with that, that's still like, I don't know where that would fall into fetish type role play. Like, what would this be, right? If it's not as traditionally described in the Bible, I mean, how would we categorize that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, dude, it was today was a whole bunch of fun, dude, and actually there's a whole bunch of stuff going on this week, and there was stuff that went on last week. We didn't really talk about it too much.
Yeah.
But, I'll say it now. I'll throw it out there for everybody, man. I did two things, dude, and not this past weekend, but the weekend prior, and that's what made it hard for us to be on PaleoRadio last week. I spoke at Wayland Union High School, dude. I'm the forever in their history, the first speaker that they ever had to come and visit their school, and it was awesome, dude. We talked about, were ex-Christians ever real Christians? Can Christianity define itself? And why this is important, not only for counter-apologetics, but for friendships and for families and stuff like that. But it wasn't the speech so much that was fun. It was afterward, we sat around a table for probably 40 minutes, 45 minutes, just talking about life and life for them at Wayland Union High School, and some of the things that they deal with, bad things and very good things, in fact. Some of the way that some students are treating them, and the kind of the friendships they're making, and how this is all evolving. So that was tons and tons of fun. And then on Monday night, okay, so the day that we canceled the show, that night I braved the weather, and I drove to Ferris State in Big Rapids, and I was part of a panel that was an interfaith panel. And honestly, like, I didn't really know the format when I went, and I kind of regret it, because the format, I think, was so that I wasn't necessarily representing myself, but speaking of atheism generally and the different schools of thought in it and stuff. I didn't know that going into it, so I with it as just, I'm speaking of skepticism, right? Take it or leave it. But it was a great time. There was a guy, I believe he's the president of the Michigan chapter of CARE. His name is Daoud. And there's a pastor, I believe it's Pastor Greg, if I remember correctly. And he was from an evangelical free church up in Big Rapids. He's got a church up there. And the other participants weren't able to be on the panel because of the weather and because of family situations and the like. But, dude, it was so much fun. And I got to meet the guys from the Bible Reloaded. It's an atheist podcast. And so I got to get pictures with them. I got to meet tons of amazing students at both Wayland and at Ferris. But today, later on today, well, not today. We'll skip that. Tomorrow. This is what I'll say. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a live student audience presentation via Skype to students in a class at Campbellsville University, and that's in Kentucky, in Campbellsville. And so what happened is the teacher, and I'll just say this briefly, the teacher watched the video that I made in response to the pastor in Kentucky saying I was never a Christian, and questioning my life as a Christian. I made a video response to that called "Were Ex-Christians Ever Real Christians?" You can find that on YouTube. But he watched that video and he was intrigued by it, and so he went and he started investigating things I've written, videos I've made, and last week the entire class that he had was dedicated to analyzing my prose piece called "Spectacular and Fortunate," my song. Cool. It was inspired by that, and a bunch of videos. And so that was last week, and we talked over the phone. It was beyond flattering. And he asked if I would be willing to do an interview. So I'm actually going to be on the screen in this classroom for this university, and these students are going to be asking me questions about my poetic works, my songs, my philosophy, my apostasy, my conversion, all that stuff. And that's tomorrow, so I'm excited about that.
Great. Yeah,
and
that's going to be a lot of fun.
You've got Southpaws.
I've got Southpaws. You were out speaking, and I was out hunting.
Yes.
So,
oh, yes.
Yeah.
Congratulations, my friend. You are awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you tagged one, bro.
Yep, I've got meat in the freezer, so it was good. I deserve it. I spent a lot of time out there. But yeah, November is always a busy month for me. I spend a lot of time out in the woods. So I'm happy to have got some. I only had one more day left. So it was a good time. But yeah, there's a lot going on. There's also Southpaws. That is every Tuesday and Wednesday from 10 o'clock to noon Eastern Standard Time. You can stream live on www.publicrealityradio.org or download the free mobile app of Public Reality. So it's great. Southpaws, there's going to be a lot of current events. We'll obviously be touching on Ferguson, and we always have some interesting callers too. So it's quite a good show. You guys should check it out.
It's going to be awesome, dude. You know what? This episode was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward already to next week. We've got tons of changes coming. January is going to be fun. December is going to be fun. This whole endeavor is fun, Joe. And I want to say this before we say goodbye, dude. I'm going to get nostalgic with some bromance, and I'm going to say this. We had Thanksgiving last Thursday. Everybody was enjoying their different Thanksgiving celebrations, but I want to say that I'm really thankful, dude, to have you in my life. I'm thankful that we're doing this together, and I'm thankful for all the viewers that we do have, and all the people who are going to PaleoRadio.us, and our volunteers. In fact, our friend Mason, he's here today. He's been live tweeting on my Twitter account. You can find that at twitter.com/paleocrat. But I'm grateful for all of these people and all of the things going on. I'm especially thankful, Joe, for our friendship and for what we're doing here with this endeavor, dude. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very grateful too. I think it's one thing to go into business with someone that you like. It's another thing to be friends and know that you could be great business partners afterward. And it's a great thing, and it's not a coincidence that we ran into each other and that things are working out well. So
it's all part of a divine plan, my friend. It's all part of a divine plan.
There you go. Somebody is working outside of us to make this all happen.
Oh, we've connected the dots. All right, dude, it was fun. I can't wait till next week. To everybody, Joe Elder, Mason, Angela, everybody, have a great week, and we'll see you again next time on Paleo Radio.
Yeah.
See ya.